Right.
All right. Dean Little, CEO of BitPing, working with MatterPool. I don't know. You got a whole bunch of projects, doing a bunch of stuff in the crypto world and have been for a while. Really, really smart guy. I always go to Dean when there are technical questions and I need someone who understands the technical stuff but can explain it in like normie language. I go to Dean, and he can almost make it dumb enough for me to understand most of the time. So good to chat with you.
Yeah, good to chat with you too, man. It's been a while.
Well, so I mostly want to talk about, and we've done this before, but we did it on Streamanity. So it was like, only people who have BSV could see it. I want to do it for a little bit broader audience here. I mostly want to talk about comparing different protocols when it comes to micropayments specifically. But one of the reasons I like chatting with you is Dean has actually built bootstrapped a profitable growing business that utilizes micropayments with BitPing that people come on and give us the quick elevator pitch for BitPing, how it works and how you use micropayments.
Sure. So when it comes to network outages, most people will actually notice these outages occur not at the center of the network with giants like Google and Amazon and where all the servers are. Usually it happens around the edges of the network, but everyone's using these tech giants to actually monitor their infrastructure and their websites and their web apps and services. And so what actually is happening is they're getting all of these false negatives when it comes to downtime. Because just because Google can access your website doesn't mean that your end user can. So essentially, they're flying blind. So what we did is we created a distributed network of people who download our app. They just run it in the background on their computer, and we send them jobs to do tests for things such as like video stream speed, website uptime, load time, UX testing, all this stuff. It just sits there and just runs in the background. And at the end of the day, we give our customers more accurate analytics and performance data for their web apps and services from real users, from real devices in right now about 70 countries. And each time one of those jobs completes, we send the user some money. And, so the micropayments aspect comes into it when, we can send someone a fraction of a cent to do this work, because before micropayments were feasible on the internet, there's no way someone would go and download our app and do this for free, but there's also no way someone would go and swipe a credit card to pay them.
Yep. Yeah, I love it because it's an example of one of the things that I've been talking about on this series, which is that it's not always, you can use micropayments on one end of a transaction without using them on the other. So your customers, where you're earning your revenue, they're businesses that are coming to you. They don't care at all about micropayments or crypto or any of this stuff. They care about getting this data, and they pay you. Here you go. We want this data for this month or this period of time. And they're paying you in cash, and they're not paying you micropayments. They're paying you larger sums. And then you are getting the data from all these people who are running this on their laptops or the PCs or whatever. And they're getting those streaming payments, those streaming tiny payments on their end, because that's the only way that it makes economic sense to tap into them. And I think it's such a great example of how an entire market, the industry that you're in, the selling uptime data or whatever, that's not an industry that on the front end is really going to care about micropayments, but on the back end, it makes so much sense. So, and I've run BitPing before, by the way. It's kind of cool. It's kind of fun, really simple. You download it, you let it run in the background. And then I think I went and checked and I had let it run for, I don't know, several days or whatever. And there was a few pennies or something worth. It was a pretty small amount. And I know in some areas, the payments are higher based on whether there's, there's a lot of people there's a lot of ways in the US to get this data. So it's less valuable for me to run it because there's a lot of competitors. But so when you're doing this, you are paying out because you need to use micropayments. You've got to use crypto. You can't use traditional, like you said, credit cards or whatever to pay out fractions of a penny to people, in constant streams and whatever. You are using BSV right now. And from my understanding, you said you also could potentially use BCH just as easily, probably, or almost as easily. And then Solana possibly. When it comes to the people receiving this, do you get complaints? Like people that are running this, are they like, I don't know what to do with this BSV you're sending me. Can you send me some cash or something? Or are they all savvy?
It's kind of half. So half the people are like they're like from the BSV community, and so they're like, oh, I have a penny, I can go and make a Twitch with this. I can go and, like share something on Twitch and then turn that into more money if my content's good and people will like it. And then, then I can, I got a few pennies, and then I can go and buy something on TDXP, and then I can flip that. And, like there's people who have gone from like a penny to like a significant amount of money just by like flipping up. So that's like probably, I would say half our user base is like that. And then the other half are kind of like, how do I immediately send this to KuCoin so that I don't have to hold it ever?
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't want it's funny. They want the utility of the coin of
Yeah.
BSV, but they don't want BSV
Yeah.
because of just the political shitstorm surrounding it, which is just, it's kind of funny. But if we compare BCH and BSV in terms of just like cash payments, right? Both of them have fees so small that you wouldn't really notice them, right? But BCH is still like about, I don't know, what was it? I think it's like 1.2 sats per byte or something, whereas BSV is like 0.5 standard, So, it's like almost double the fees. And when you're talking like something where you sit there running it for a few days and get a few pennies or whatever, it's like the fees at that micropayment scale, the fees do still make up a significant portion, right? And so you have to have higher minimums and stuff like that. But yeah, people have been saying, can you add BCH? Can you add Solana? And the main reason is because they've been earning, maybe for a year or something. Some people have made, like some people in Southeast Asia make more money than it costs to pay for their phone bill, for example. Like it literally pays for their internet. Some people in the US and in Europe have just like run a lot of different nodes, and they've earned, $100-200 sort of thing. But then they've seen with the price action, it's just like plummeted from like 200 to 100. And so they're like, can you add other assets? Because this isn't going up in value, or this isn't going up in price, should I say.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I think for micropayment use cases to really gain broad adoption, there's got to be a separation from the volatility of crypto markets. Can you separate the utility from the volatility? And there's sort of two approaches to that. One is, well, you just wait until some coin is so broadly used that it is money, and then everybody uses it and wants to hold it, and it stabilizes because of that, which seems very, very hard to bank on. Or is there a way that you can utilize the micropayment features of crypto and then give both users the experience that your businesses have right now? They pay you in cash. They don't ever have to worry about the price of crypto. They don't have to go buy BSV and then send it to you or whatever. Can your people on the other end somehow have a fiat experience where they can get paid out in fiat? And like that technological hurdle, I think is really like, if that can be solved, then the breakthroughs, then the massive adoption of micropayments comes, because there's just so many people that, what am I going to do with BSV or any of these cryptos? And do I want the business risk of having to maintain? I mean, even if I'm a business that builds something on micropayments and my earnings, my revenue is coming in any form of crypto. Now you're also playing speculator, and you're like, well, my core business is to build a business, not to speculate on assets that trade with high volatility. So I think that's really interesting though. But it's interesting that half of your users probably are users because they like the coin and they come to BitPing because they want to earn more of it. And then the other half are people that they just want to earn money and they don't care what form it comes in. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's just to do with like, the history of how we got started. But like what you see is like more and more of those people, like they don't care what coin, they just want to profit. And like that's good. That's what they should want, right? They shouldn't care what coin, they should just want to profit. But yeah, in terms of like sending a stable coin for like really, really cheap, like literally the cheapest way to send like US dollars today would be Solana, like USDC on Solana. It's like less than 0.01 cents or something like that to send a transaction. Like so you can send like fractions of a penny, but it's actually a penny. It's not, it's not Solana, it's a penny
Yep.
on
Yep.
Solana. And so they've released a product called Solana Pay, which is like a proof of it's not proof. I'm thinking in my head POS and I'm going proof of stake. Point of sale. It's like a point of sale system that allows people to make use of this because it's so much cheaper than credit cards and PayPal.
Yeah.
Like they're 30 cents something. Those are what, 30-cent
30
transaction
cents
fees.
plus 3%. Yep.
Yeah, ridiculous. So like people can literally just use Solana and like USDC on Solana. And like put it this way, if the federal government wanted to go and do another round of stimulus, the cheapest way to do it in US dollar equivalent would be USDC on Solana. Like,
And that's working
crazy.
right now.
Yeah, it works.
Yeah. Why? Okay, so if people get paid in USDC, the benefit is now they don't have to worry about the crypto volatility. The downside is they still have to change it into dollars if they want to go use it in most of the real world outside of the digital world. And even the digital world, there's a lot of places that not very many places accept US. If you want to go buy something online, Amazon, whatever, they're not going to accept USDC.
Well, it's we are seeing more and more people taking it up. Like right now, the most common way of sending USDC, I would say, is like TRC20, the Tron version of it. But that's Tron USDT rather, not USDC.
Yeah, that's
but,
right. USDT.
But that seems to me like the most common one. Like everyone's like, give me a Tron address. But for and that also works. Like the fees are pretty reasonable there too. But yeah, I think they've got this big push. They're talking to like Congress and stuff, like trying to like get this all rolled out. I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if you started to see it like pop up as an alternative to credit cards, because you just say to a merchant like, "There's no volatility. Your fees are like almost nothing. Like you won't even notice them." Like I think it's such a no-brainer. And then the biggest criticism I have of it is like, if we do make use of these tiny micropayments on Solana, like what on Solana can you spend them on? Because it seems the primary use case for Solana is like DeFi stuff or buying a JPEG that isn't actually on chain and stuff like that. And like, I'm sure entrepreneurs will come along and businesses will come along and build cool stuff, but like, because the protocol itself is really good, but like, yeah, it's lacking in entrepreneurs. I think it's got a lot of skillful coders and not a whole lot of like real business entrepreneurs going and making use of this stuff. So
does any chain have a lot of entrepreneurs building micropayment applications?
Well, like BTC used to, right? Like, I would say the first like real app would have to be like Satoshi Dice. And then as the price went up and the block size stayed the same, the fees became, impossible. And Satoshi Dice was forced to fully centralize everything. And, you do one big deposit and you have an account and yada, 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 as opposed to just, you could just gamble with your BTC. So really what you see is like, there's like two economic activities, right? There's like holding the thing, doing nothing, speculating and watching it go up in value. And then there's like trying to accumulate more of it with interesting features and apps and whatever, right? And people overwhelmingly just want to put their $20 on Coinbase and wait a year and take a look at it and see if it's going to $30. You know, like that's the
Maybe they
average crypto
do,
user.
or maybe there just aren't that many uses that are interesting. So like when I have just with like my buddies, I've sent them, called it where they can go and pick NFL games and it's 10 cents per pick and whatever. And they all love it. They all think it's great. Oh, this is super fun. This is really cool. This is a really unique way to do fantasy football using micropayments. There's so few things like that. Like I'm just really shocked, and I keep looking for where's the community that has the most activity like that. And believe it or not, it seems to be BSV. And there's like 20 legitimate apps. You know what I mean? Like maybe there's a couple hundred, but like 20 legitimate micropayment apps. And then you look at like BCH has like 2 or 3, maybe. And they're kind of semi-abandoned, like true micropayment apps. Solana, I really have a hard time finding anything other than DeFi and NFTs. I found a couple that are projects that raised money and say that they're real, but they don't seem to have anything done at all. One was actually a fantasy sports app. So I'm just really curious, it feels to me like it's super, super early because the escalating price from like 2015 on basically blinded everyone. Everybody just started chasing tokens and NFTs and trading and speculating stuff because that was where there was money to be made. And it kind of lost, sort of forgot what's possible with micropayments. So from a technological standpoint, what are the protocols? We've already mentioned a few. What are the protocols that are capable of doing, let's say, sub-cent payments? So 1/10 of a penny, 100th of a penny payments. Like what could, if you're somebody that, let's say you want to build a simple game that costs you 1/10 of a penny every time you play, or a penny, and then you get paid out 1/10 of a penny. What are your options for protocols? We got BSV, we got BCH, with Solana, sounds like. What others?
Oh, on a good day, Litecoin fees can get low enough that you could like make a transaction, but it's not quite instant.
If you're thinking of building it to where you want it to be really large, really scalable, and you want to be able to rely on it, Litecoin is not quite reliable enough.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't do it on Litecoin, but I'm just saying like it can get under a cent, the fee. Doge used to be under a cent, but then the price just went crazy. So and that's the whole thing, right? If the block size isn't elastic to demand, then the fees go through the roof and kill innovation on your chain. And anyway, but the other protocols. There is a blockchain that came out, it was like 2 or 3 years ago, called Iost, and it's one of the best blockchains I've ever like actually worked with. And it's like it's barely, I don't know if it's even in the top 100 or anything, but like it's got this like JavaScript smart contract interpreter, and it's got like you instead of paying fees, you just like stake your resources and you get X amount of gas per day from it, and so the transaction doesn't really like cost you anything to send, but you are limited by how much you keep tied up, and that's like a way of like, I guess, making the currency more or less inflationary. So there's another blockchain that can do free transactions. I can't remember the name.
Some people have mentioned to me Dash and Nano. I'm trying to think.
It was Nano. Yeah. So like there's a few of them out there. Like, but like I would consider, if you want a micropayments use case, you really need fees to be under 0.1 cents, right?
Yeah,
so a tenth of a penny. A tenth of a penny means you can send a penny. It's a 10% transaction fee on sending a penny, right? But like you send 10 pennies, it's like 1% transaction fee. It becomes like negligible, right? So I think 0.1 cents is like that's kind of the benchmark at which I say this is a chain you should build on for micropayments.
How does, because I'm thinking even more extreme than that. I'm like, I want to be able to send 1/100th of a penny. And on BSV, I have before. I've been able to send tenths and even hundredths of pennies before. how does Solana compare in that? Like, how low can you go on Solana?
I haven't checked the prices recently, but generally speaking, like a few months ago, it was about half the price of a PSV transaction.
Okay, so you can go you can go even lower. You can send
Yeah,
hundreds, thousands of pennies. So it's cheaper. The model that it's built on, is it such that, does it run into the issue if price starts going up, those fees start going up, or do they stay at that really low?
no,
Okay,
no.
I didn't think so, because they have like a proof of history sort of setup.
Yeah, so the strange thing I see with Solana is they don't have price discrimination baked into the fee market, which I think is kind of strange. I think that that's something they should have. I think you should be able to be like, this transaction is costing me a lot of resources and I don't really want to process it. So rather than saying no, it should just cost them this much money and they can decide if they want to pay me that. Like,
the ability to negotiate with miners, I think, is actually a great thing for different types of transactions.
It can be, but it can also create other problems. So, because you got to think you're sharing that network with other people, right? And all of a sudden, a miner just goes and dumps a shit ton of transactions on the network, right? That you haven't seen before. It's like that's costing you like money, resources, storage space, etc. You haven't really benefited or profited from that, and by virtue of them being the big guy and you're the small guy, you basically have to take it. And like, if you look at how like competition laws work in most countries, that's like, it's actually a violation of like antitrust laws to cause your competitors, to take on an unfair amount of burden in the market, and in a way that they can't compete with you. Now, of course, if it can happen, though, it will happen, and that's what we're seeing. It's essentially like at scale, this stuff is cartel stuff, basically, right? So it can be it can be good in terms of like the fact that you can have price discrimination. It can also cause other problems. Like think for a moment, like if you could just mine everything at any fee rate and you would make more money, would you care so much about discriminating based on price? Right? Like probably not, right? Because from the miner perspective, you should just be like, I want money, right? But yeah, so like you can sort of see like when it's like a medium scale, the price discrimination thing is like an anti denial of service sort of measure. But when you get to like really, really big scale, it's like it does come to a point where just even the fee calculation required to see if you'll mine something is just overhead, and you could just just like blast through it. So
it is the fact that all transactions are treated equally on Solana in terms of fees. Is that one of the issues that has led to recently the network crashing a lot, because people are sending really high data, like heavy duty transactions, and there's no way to price those any differently, and so they're kind of filling up the network with data that it can't handle?
So there's two things. So the first thing was like the Radium bots, that they're just sitting there absolutely spamming, trying to like snipe bids on Radium. And so they were publishing all these transactions. A lot of them are failing. A lot of them, weren't working, but that was jamming up the system. And then now it's like that problem's like significantly reduced, but they're literally having issues where like their servers are at capacity for accepting transactions, and they need a way to shard that up and like load balance that stuff, because the raw network itself is breaking down. It's not the software, it's the demand for the network. It's the bandwidth and the throughput that they're struggling with. So that in itself is a difficult problem, right? You want to launch a node and let anyone be able to run it, but then when you also don't want your network to have these weak nodes that can't deal with the throughput. And so it very much is like that Stackelberg game, right? Where like, everyone has to follow the leader and keep up. But if the leader goes too fast, everyone else falls off and the network dies. So it's kind of, yeah.
Yeah. So do you like, I'm always trying to assess the, the relative pros and cons of working with any different protocol and looking in the near term versus the long term. When you look at the model for, let's say, Solana compared to big block Bitcoin, BCH or BSV, and you say, if I were to imagine a world where we got millions of people using this all the time for sub-cent payments, penny payments, whatever, is there anything in the model of Solana versus big block Bitcoin that makes you say this one is more, I think I can trust the economic incentives and the technology involved long term more than the other?
Well, you could make the argument like Bitcoin's been around for what, 12, 13 years sort of thing. And it's been down about like 4 times in that time. So Bitcoin is to some extent battle tested, if you know what I mean, like for very vanilla looking payments, that is, right? Like if you're just sending a pay to public key hash or whatever, that sort of thing is pretty foolproof. When it comes to larger scripts and stuff, I don't think that's true. I mean, like right now, the node software doesn't even look at your script and like calculate a fee based upon how many codes it has to execute, right? So like right now, there are scripts that I could create that could like shut down any Bitcoin node if I mine them into a block, right? Because there's like nodes are free to reject transactions from the peer-to-peer network that they don't like or whatever. But once it gets into a block, they have to validate it, right? And I've taken testnet offline before. Like it's not hard to do. You can talk to like Gorilla Pool. I'm like, hey, can I try to attack your nodes? They're like, yeah, sure. I'm like, oh, cool. I took it offline. They're like, yeah, damn. Like, so, what you get, like what you see in terms of like propaganda in this space is just absolutely insane. No one's willing to be honest and like look at the elephant in the room and like solve these difficult problems. They'd rather tell narratives because that's better for speculation, which is the primary thing that people want to do with blockchains, right? Like we don't want peer-to-peer electronic cash. We want, how do I speculate on this currency? Oh, the currency is failing. How do I speculate on JPEGs instead? Like that's what they want. So
what story will make the price go up? So let's say today, if let's just pick a big giant consumer. Let's say Twitter, all of a sudden every interaction cost a penny, or Spotify, every song cost 1/100 of a penny. Given the number of users that Twitter has, what, like 100 million, couple 100 million users or something like that. I don't know what their daily actives are and activities per day, but just given that sort of scope, is there any existing protocol today that could handle that volume of tiny transactions going?
Yeah, like the Bitcoin protocol can handle that, right?
What about the network as it exists of miners?
That's the thing. The node software is not really up to scratch. There's no competition in mining, etc. It's kind of like, the protocol itself is not the problem. It's the people and the implementation, of that protocol that really needs some work.
Which network would break first, or which would last the longest with volume? You know what I mean? Or who could go the biggest as of today?
Well, it's probably BSV, I would say, probably.
BCH, I mean, I know their rhetoric has been the most focused on radical scale and terabyte blocks.
Yeah, but that's not scale. That's not scale. What you go and upload a terabyte, not terabyte. You go and upload like a gigabyte file to a miner's private database, and then they add proof of work to it. That's not scaling. Scaling is I can validate 50,000 transactions per second. Every second of every day. Without any double spends. And the whole network is able to reach consensus. And it's not just me, this one giant miner. There's like at least 5 or 6 of us sort of thing competing for this.
That's all I ask. That's all I ask. I just want like 100,000 transactions per second at the ability to go down to sub-cent and be instant and have no double spends and, be good to go.
Well, Visa does it. Visa does it. They just charge you like a ridiculous amount of money for
Right.
it. Right.
I need those fees to be, hundredths of a penny or
not
less.
ridiculous. Yeah, not ridiculous. Because the thing that we've spoken about, I think last time, I think I said was like, there's this massive market on the internet, right? For things like, people filling out surveys or people, watching paid ads or whatever and profiting from it, right? Even you can look at the basic attention token, like that's baked into Brave browser. Like that is fantastic. You get paid for like whatever you consume. That's good. You share your data and you get paid, not just some big Silicon Valley firm. So like these things are all really good, but those markets can only really exist between they can only really exist when payments are affordable. So there's all these like untapped data use cases between like the 0 and 1, like 0 cents and $1 sort of mark, right? Because there's things that you might want to pay $1 for, but someone's not going to do it for the 65 cents that they receive after fees, plus the other 35 cents they'll need to go and move their 65 cents after. So, it's that there's a lot of things on the internet that would be worth $1 that we literally can't pay people $1 for right now. And it's only like very recently that that's been possible. So I think once people understand the power of that, I think you'll see a lot of apps like springing up like that.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because there's like this, I broke in the first video I did on this series, I broke these things into 3 categories. One is happening today, one is possible today, and then one is theoretically possible. And what's interesting is like truly like nano payments that are instant and all this stuff, they are happening today. I mean, BitPing is doing them all the time and they're doable. I could spin up an app that does them, but they are also only doable to a point. Like if I said I want to get Spotify or Twitter, as I mentioned, to do it, there isn't a network that could currently handle that, right? You'd have to, now most companies, you don't go from 0 to 50,000 transactions per second anyway, but there's this long-term question of like, okay, cool, it works today. Let's say on BSV, I can instantly send you a tenth of a penny and we can do this back and forth as many times as we want to today. And it's going to be quick. It's going to be instant. It's going to work flawlessly. But if that's scaled up, can I trust that network's going to be able to do that for the long term? And the same for Solana and the same for any of these, or for, 2 years down the road, if my company takes off, can I rely on this network to continue to process these transactions at this low cost? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, like, and it's really telling from the attitude that, all these networks take too, right? BCH attitude is, oh, it's big enough now and it scales enough now. And if more people use it, then we'll just like scale it a bit more. Right. And so it's literally this apathetic, like, don't build it and hope they come. Right. And then on Solana, things are breaking all the time because it's in beta. It's not even like a full mainnet release yet. It's still beta. But when things break, the first thing they do is go, okay, this is broken. We're going to go and do a 2-week sprint with 50 incredibly talented engineers and go and solve it. And then they do, right? And they're open about it. And they're like, they tell everyone, this is what's happening. This is what went wrong. And then they say, everyone, update your nodes. We've solved all these problems. You're going to make more money. And people go and do it, right? And it's all voluntary. It's like, it's incredible. And then on BSV, it's like, there was the, what was the launch? Was it the one we did over Christmas? I can't remember. Anyway, I think it was it the frogs or
like an NFT launch?
Yeah, there was like an NFT launch on Rare Candy over Christmas, and like the whole network was just completely wrecked because whoever was working at Tal like was on holidays, like probably like cutting up a turkey or whatever, right? And like there, I mean, like probably like like cracked a beer, cutting up a turkey, whatever. It'll just take care of itself. It didn't. It didn't take care of itself. It completely fucked up. Like
because of like a software setting that at the miners end or what?
Yeah. Basically, the node software fell over, and then they like moved. They like flipped from the good node to the shit node, and then the shit node was under a lot of stress and yada yada yada.
And
right?
so you could potentially build something that stops working because
yeah. So when I posted about this on Twitter, Calvin like says, "You should have planned ahead." I'm just like,
look, listen.
My apologies.
Listen,
I didn't realize the
BSV
economy shut down. I didn't realize the economy shut down for Christmas.
Absolutely massive scale. As long as you send a note to the one guy at the mining company and say, hey, heads up, we need to make sure that you can scale on this particular date. Don't go out for a beer.
Yeah, like that's like, and like I'm not saying don't have holidays or whatever. I'm saying like,
no, you should have a network that you don't need to know the guy personally and make sure he's going to have everything ready to go, right? The network should just work and be able to handle what you put on it.
Especially when it's like not particularly scary sort of stuff,
Well, and when it advertises itself as the network for massive scale.
Yeah, enterprise, right? Did you know that enterprise apps, they actually stop working on Christmas? That's why Spotify sends you like that your yearly wrap thing. It's like, yeah, we're not going to give you any more songs because it's Christmas, right? But here's all the ones you listened to this year, right? You can go back and listen to them. We're not going to like. It's absolutely just ridiculous, the attitude that if anything goes wrong, it's never our fault. It's always the user's fault. It's always the other person's fault. It's totally ridiculous.
So there's totally kind of it's sort of interesting the different approaches you laid out there. There's the BCH, like just leave it as it is. If it ever gets to a point where people want to use it more, then we'll think about fixing problems, which is sort of like pragmatic but uninspired. Then you have Solana, which is like, let's just push this baby all the time. Let's see if we can break it. Every time it breaks, let's all rally around and talk about how it broke and try to fix it. And everybody just expects that it's going to have some bugs and let's just, work through it. And then BSV is like, this thing can work today. It's massive. Everything works fine. But then like, because there's so few people actually maintaining and running it, it breaks. And you like literally got to DM somebody or tweet to the right, tweet to the people that need to reconfigure their nodes or whatever. Okay. Why, for you, why would you keep working on BSV given some of those criticisms and the environment that it sounds like Solana has a culture that is more attractive to you? Why keep working on BSV?
Good question. I still think there's a lot that I can squeeze out of it. Certainly, the current node implementation is not very good, and so the way I see it is like, if you solve problems on BSV, like and like personally, I don't see BSV as Bitcoin, right? I see like this Bitcoin is the Bitcoin protocol, and BSV is a fork of that protocol, as is BTC and BCH.
Yeah. That's how I think about them too. It's like there's Bitcoin, and then there's these 3 different implementation, or maybe 4 with eCash, or God knows how many.
Yeah.
So gold, whatever.
Yeah. So like, I don't see any of them as actually fulfilling the promise or the vision of Bitcoin. But I do see that like, if you solve these wicked problems on BSV, like dealing with like incompetent miners, network outages, just ridiculous amounts of data suddenly smashing your server, all that stuff. If you deal with that and you manage to build infrastructure that can handle that gracefully when everything else is breaking down and on fire and whatever, right? Whatever does eventually scale to become Bitcoin, you've solved for that, right? So Bitcoin is this like, scaling Bitcoin is this like crazy engineering challenge that like no one's really solved after like 12, 13 years. Like you can go and like upload some like massive files and pretend that you've solved scaling, but you haven't. Like that's not scaling, right? That's about as interesting as like BitTorrent or something. In fact, it's worse because it's like it's like one-to-one connection. It's not like one to many or many to one. You know, it's like it's not even as exciting as BitTorrent, right? Of course, you can just spam data onto a chain and pretend it's scale. Scale is when you can handle 50,000, 100,000 transactions per second. That's when you can handle like basically all of the world's economic activity.
Yeah.
And even if it's like, even if it was something like, we take standard payments like P2PKH and we put them through a GPU and we just absolutely rip them 24/7, right? And then it can also do a couple of other things like put data on chain and a couple of token things and whatever, but they go in the slow lane. As long as just like the micropayments can hit 50 to 100K sort of thing per second.
Well, that's where like the price discrimination thing, and maybe price discrimination isn't even the full extent of it, but the ability to say there are different ways to use the blockchain, and micropayments are pretty well defined, and they have certain things that they need. They need the speed, they need the really low fees. And if I'm just doing a shit ton of micropayments, you can service that in a different way than you service something like some complicated execution of a smart contract or some other stuff.
Exactly.
You know? Do you have a philosophical or technical or economic or emotional attachment to proof of work versus like something like Solana's doing, which is kind of a hybrid, or something like proof of stake or whatever? Do you believe that long-term proof of work, like, because I've dug pretty deep into some of these arguments, and every time I dive into the arguments, I usually come away being like, yeah, I just don't see how. I feel like you got to be proof of work for the long term, or it's not going to work. And then I always forget why I was convinced of that. So, what is your thought on that? Like, to have Bitcoin or something like it in the vision, does it need to be proof of work?
When you have significant proof of work behind something, you can trust it in absence of the rest of the blockchain. So, put it this way: if someone came and showed you a recent BTC block, right? And it was absolutely like ridiculous difficulty. You know, there's probably like 5 people in the world who could have produced that level of difficulty. And they're, you know, probably not lying, right? Just by looking at that one block header in absence of the entire chain, you have established already a mathematical proof that it would be really hard to make this block header. It could be a fake, but they've at least gone and spent, I don't know, 100,000 or something dollars, like trying to make this fake proof of a block header, you know, whereas with proof of stake, you have absolutely zero guarantees in absence of the rest of the ledger and the network. But then at the same time, with proof of work, you have the ability to have these like 100 block reorgs on BSV because the difficulty is so low, right? Whereas proof of stake doesn't reorg. It really doesn't, because the economic incentives aren't there, and no one can just like move that much stake to go and disrupt the network. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't have this reorg problem. And then when it comes to proof of stake, you have really like quick transaction finality. Like there are chains that can have transaction finality within 20 seconds. That is to say, it's buried under enough blocks that it's treated as irreversible, right? Whereas Bitcoin never actually achieves that. It just has probabilistic, what would you say? It's probabilistic security, if you know what I mean. Like it's very unlikely someone's going to go and outmine this. But with proof of stake, like the rules of the network are, at a certain point, generally something's considered like irreversible on most networks like that. But I think they're kind of good at solving different things. My main criticism of proof of stake over proof of work is that it enables people to weaponize liquidity, which like when it first started coming out, like proof of stake and all of that, as opposed to proof of work, what ended up happening was like people would put their money on exchanges. Exchanges would have all this liquidity, and they would know users are going to withdraw a maximum of 20-30% of their liquidity on a bad day, right? So I've got 70% of my users' liquidity that I can tie up voting for my own node and sit here just printing money, right? And so it enabled exchanges to weaponize users' liquidity against them. And now, the bigger exchanges like OKX, Binance, etc., they allow you to earn from your own liquidity tied up in their exchange, but they still take a fee. So what that shows you is that proof of stake actually leads to exchanges running nodes, because they're the ones commanding the largest amount of liquidity. And if you think about what the job of an exchange is to extract the maximum amount of value out of you possible, right? So you've got this network run by essentially banks who are trying to charge you bank fees, and
they
use
have
your
a
money against you.
massive incentive to encourage the creation of as many coins as possible and as many different ways to, exchange this with that and that, right? Because that's their business, is trading.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, I don't think
care,
that's
but
inherently wrong, but I think it's interesting. You can see how perhaps proof of stake contributed to part of what has driven crypto away from like business use cases and into just speculative use cases,
Well, you can see it on Tron, on Eos, on every one of these chains. Basically, the block validators, like the top 10, I just looked some of them up. The top 10 are either founding teams, VC firms who were behind the founding teams, or exchanges, right? So I think that proof of stake can solve certain problems really well and really efficiently, but when it comes to these inflationary assets, I think if you can accumulate a lot of liquidity somewhere like an exchange can, then you're going to be able to take over that network and subvert it and do whatever you want. So then the other, I suppose, counter argument is why would exchanges ruin these networks when it would tank the price, and so they wouldn't be able to cash out, but they can literally manipulate that too. So it's that's my main issue with proof of stake. Other than that, it has a lot of upsides in terms of the UX is way better. It's much faster to get transactions confirmed. It's much faster to get them into blocks. You can get into a Solana block in 300 to 500 milliseconds.
So when you talk about that from a I'm a idiot non-technical person, I'm sort of I don't really care, because my user experience with zero confirmation, especially if I'm a vendor and I'm selling something, I've got a thing that people can buy with BSV, or if I'm buying it as a consumer, the experience is instant. And the fact that there's some probability that there could be some double spend or whatever, that doesn't really worry me. Probabilistic security doesn't worry me. I think the economic incentives are such that there's not really enough of a likelihood of that happening that I really want to care too much about it. Is that just because these networks are so small and not that many people are trying to screw with them? Is that something that, the current model of zero conf, and then you've got the, you wait, whatever, it gets into a block, and then after X number of confirmations, the difficulty of trying to double spend goes so high that, do you see that as problematic? Do you see that as not secure enough? I've never seen that as not secure enough. It always seems
I just
the economic calculus seems quite secure.
I just see it as a shitty UX, because I can on Tron, even Tron is a total shit coin, right? I can go and get something mined into a block in 3 seconds, right? On Eos or on Solana or any of these other chains, I can get it in 300 to 500 milliseconds, right? Into a block. They can go, it's in this block, right? And it's not gonna get reorged. If it does, it'll be in another block within 500 milliseconds.
What kind of use case? Because I'm thinking again, I'm thinking from a normie consumer standpoint.
Yeah. Okay.
If I click on Twitch, it just works and it's done. And I don't need to know that. I don't need to know that didn't make it into a block until 10 minutes later. That doesn't change my user experience not knowing that, right? Because it feels the same.
Yeah, that might be the case in terms of something as tiny as like a Twitch like, where it's the
Yeah.
same as like a Twitter like. Like Twitter goes over capacity all the time. You like something and it doesn't make it into their database, right? Like that
Yeah.
happens all the time on Twitter. So in these cases, you probably don't care too much.
Yeah.
However, if a transaction fails, it can screw up your UTXO set and yada yada yada. So there can
Okay.
be all these like downstream effects, right?
Got
Which
it.
is when you if you have like unreliable broadcast in a UTXO system, you're screwed, you know, and
Yep.
that's where we're at now with Bitcoin. Um, Whereas in an account based system, you don't have this problem, right? Like uh, you just have a balance and an account, and you spend you spend the balance, but you know I guess the drawback is you have to be able to recover your balance from somewhere, or know you have at least a certain amount to like sign something, right? But yeah, so I think like if you think in terms of like buying a coffee, right? The best option today to buy a coffee is actually BCH, even though it's slightly more expensive, because there's less activity. It's easier to audit, and it's like it's got higher hash rate. It's less likely to reorg. You know, like everything about it is just they've got better point of sale systems, etc. They're integrated into like every major platform, right? And SolPay is probably going to be a really significant competitor there because you can do the USDC thing. But if you look at like some of these proof of stake chains, they can be really great because your transaction can be irreversible within 20 seconds, right?
Yeah.
So that's like in the time you've, you know, ground the coffee beans, the transaction already can't be reversed,
Yep.
which is better than a credit card
Oh
in
yeah.
terms
Yeah.
of like every metric imaginable, right?
Yeah.
It's better than Bitcoin even because it's so fast. Like as a merchant, it's quick. So if you take away all of these horrible network effects of the proof of stake stuff, where eventually exchanges get to manipulate their vast liquidity against their own users and customers and whatever, and you just ignore all that crap and you just think in the context of the UX of these chains,
Yep.
it's pretty damn good,
Does
especially if you're using like USDC, right? If you're
does
using a coin that's insulated from that
yeah.
crap, like it's pretty damn good.
Does proof of stake, what are the implications on the fees from proof of stake? Is that like, because I know if Ethereum fees are insane, but that's not, from my understanding, because it's well, it's actually not proof of stake yet, is it? Aren't they trying to move to
No,
proof of
not
stake?
yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. They've been saying it for years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does proof of stake, what implication is that on fees? Does it change? Can you have a proof of stake chain that has very, very low fees that stay very low? Or is there something about the system that tends towards fees behaving in a certain direction?
Well, proof of stake obviously is cheaper to produce than
Yeah.
proof of work, which means that really all you're buying into is like network effect essentially, which is the same way a printing press works, right? So
Like
what that
how are the
means
fees set? How are the fees set in proof of stake?
Oh, well, some chains they have incredibly low fees or no fee. Like the fee is literally like there are chains where you stake your coin for resources and you get allocated like resources on a daily or whatever basis. Based like so like I look up 1,000 of this shit coin, right? That enables me to make 50 casual transactions a day for free. And in exchange for that, everyone else benefits by me apparently locking up my liquidity, making the coin less liquid, and therefore increasing demand for the coin to make payments, right? Like that's the theory, right? In
This stuff
practice,
is
what
so crazy.
happens? In practice, you know what? Oh, dude, you want me to just quick tangent, just blow your mind?
Yeah.
Uh, so technically that's true, right? Yeah, you look it up and the coin becomes more liquid. It becomes less liquid, and therefore you increase demand for the coin, and that's like really good Ponzi-nomics. But what people have done now on all these proof of stake chains is they now give you a derivative. So you like lock your coin up, right, in like staking for something or whatever, right? They create a derivative token, which is an IOU to get your coins back. And now you can trade the IOU token freely, and you give that to someone who's happy to wait 24 hours to unlock those coins, you can get services like immediately using those locked coins. So like you can actually DeFi your way out of this problem. It's so funny. But anyway, there are networks like that where you lock up some liquidity and you can do transactions for free. And so in that case, these transaction processing people are making money primarily from inflation. That is, each block the coin inflates. And then there are chains like Solana where you just pay very low fees and they accumulate the same way as Bitcoin.
And are those fees set at the protocol level, or are they determined by the people that are processing those transactions?
It's usually set by the node developers. But I'm sure in most cases you'd be able to accept a lower fee. You'd be able to tweak it, but it's really on a per network basis. Each of them navigate this quite differently.
But there's no technical reason that a proof of stake chain would have fees that would have to worry about fees being higher than proof of work with massive blocks.
Well, just think about the sort of network you're building with proof of stake. You're essentially recreating the banking system with a cartel of banksters, right?
Yeah.
So what's to say they don't reach world domination and then jack the fees up?
Yeah, they corner the market and then they control it. Yeah.
So
which is what I love about the mining, the entry and exit of miners, that ability to come and compete with each other. I don't know. There's something about that just appeals to me more from an incentive standpoint than proof of stake.
I feel like just like the proof of work, just like it filters out a lot of like bullshit,
Yes. Right.
Like that's the simplest way you can really put it. But it is also extremely expensive. And so it needs to be put into context, right? It's the same as aerospace is extremely expensive, but like it's kind of nice to have GPS, right? So like you have to like put things into perspective. Is having global GPS worth billions of dollars? It's like, well, of course it is, because it creates and saves billions of dollars, right? But so you need to, if you're going to spend all this money on proof of work, you need to make it do something useful for the world, for humanity, and solve some problems with it. And certainly there are problems that it can solve. But yeah, I think it's not like, I think proof of work has got this nice sort of how would I say, it punishes people who are like it punishes bad actors and makes it hard. It makes it like have a high barrier to entry for doing bad shit. Whereas proof of stake has got a much better UX. It's much faster, it's much cheaper. But then there's like no barrier to entry other than network effects. And so really it's like, if you build the McDonald's of proof of stake, you win. That's just kind of how that works.
So okay, you mentioned for one of the downsides of a proof of work chain, especially if the hash is low, you can get these reorgs.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, like how problematic is that? Because my take is, I feel like when like the 100 block reorg happened on BSV, I feel like BSV fans pretended like it didn't matter at all, which seems silly to me. And BSV enemies pretended like, oh my gosh, this just proves the whole network is flawed and you can't have big blocks. It's a total disaster, which totally seems wrong to me as well. My take is like, yeah, it matters, but it doesn't matter as much as you might think. Like, is it that much of a problem? I mean, so when that happened, I use all these apps that use BSV. I never noticed anything. Nothing seemed to change. Everything still seemed to work. Maybe things went down. I don't know if maybe things went down for several hours.
As the guy maintaining probably at least a handful of those.
Yeah,
apps,
you probably maintain half of them.
It's not a fun day.
So like what happens? Like, so I mean, it happened. You get 100 block reorg, and then it all gets patched up in like a couple hours. Like, isn't that just like a growing pain sort of thing, or is that like, no, this is a fundamental problem that's going to keep happening, and you can't?
No, that was handled absolutely terribly. So we had the Bitcoin Association on Twitter going, please invalidate this illegal chain. And it's like, why is it illegal? What made that illegal? It's not illegal. It's literally in the rules. You're allowed to do that. And then it's like, oh, it contained a double spend. Oh, did it? Can you please show us the double spend so that we can like see that, you know? And not to mention, you know, every block tile mines now contains double spends because their broadcast system is wrecked. Like they are double spending transactions they say that they will mine, like right now, because they've got like a load balancer between multiple nodes. And so
who's paying for that then? Who's suffering?
it's usually, well, people who are actually making transactions.
Well, like, but what
But
would give me like, because I've never experienced or encountered someone who's experienced, you know, the double
okay,
spend issue.
yeah. So look at like the rare candy mint. Like there was like about 400 transactions that were submitted. They said they would mine, and then they reorged with competing spends. So like
So then some of those, so some
so
of the people that had a transaction that appeared like it went through, turned out it didn't show up in the block later, and it didn't go
yes.
through.
So it can be like this, right? Say there's two nodes. We send transaction 1 to node 1, transaction 2 to node 2, right? Well, then it's not within our control because that's load balanced on their end, right? We send one here, one there, right? This one doesn't have this transaction, right? And so this one's saying, oh, the transaction failed because I don't have the previous transaction that it's spending, right? And so we go, oh, that transaction failed. We'll reuse that UTXO next time because it hasn't been spent. And then you go to reuse that UTXO next time, right? In the meantime, this node's broadcasted it to here, but it failed on this node and it said it failed. And then you broadcast a competing spend back to that node because it's giving you false negatives and false positives and false everything, right?
Yep.
When broadcast is not reliable, you can have it where you could get like 2, 3, 4 transactions deep. It invalidates the first or second transaction, and that whole chain is broken. Now compound that with the fact that on networks like Twitch, one interaction, like one transaction could interact with say 4 or 5 people.
Yeah.
You know, someone makes a post, it gets shared. You then like that post while you're tagging 3 people while you're /paying them.
Yep.
Like,
yeah.
And then they all go and use those UTXOs in their subsequent transactions. And then you've just broken this entire slice of the graph of Twitch, you know? So,
so do you think that is a fundamental problem with the UTXO model that's just always going to be a risk, or is that just, hey, look, it doesn't have to be this way. You could totally avoid this if the network would just run better and people,
it's a people and implementation problem primarily. Okay. Like UTXOs are much harder to work with than accounts, of course, but like it doesn't have to be that hard. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
if you just like, if you just write good software and implement it correctly, like it should be this hard, right? I should submit a transaction to a miner, and subjectively, obviously there's no objective view of the blockchain, right? Every miner has their own mempool. But if I submit to one miner and I don't submit to any other miner, let's just say, and they subjectively say to me, this is good, I'm going to mine it, I'm not going to allow any double spends, right? And they literally only have a positive or a negative. It's a yes, no, I will mine it or I won't, right? And there is no false positives, there's no false negatives. You've got somebody with hash rate who's committed that they will mine this. They then broadcast it out to other people with hash rate who will probably mine it. But you've already got that agreement with them saying that they'll mine it, right? That's good enough.
Yeah.
You know, that's good enough. But what we have now is both false positives and false negatives, which when you're working with UTXOs, it's just absolutely, it's dog shit, because it just completely like messes the whole thing up. And then you have to wait for blocks to come in to sort of see what did and didn't make it. And, you know, so it's really not great. There are ways to fix it. And, you know, I'm working on some stuff, but yeah, so like that would be my biggest concern, is like if you wanted to onboard Twitter tomorrow, for example, like that would happen with the current network. You know, that would literally happen to, like, when you have social graphs where there's these like long chains of interconnected like relationships, and they're on spending. Like you can do stuff like you can spend confirmed UTXOs first, or like older UTXOs first, and that can, you know, solve part of the problem, right? But then all of a sudden someone wants to pay, you know, $20, and they need to gather up a whole bunch of these, you know, these UTXOs to pay the $20, and then any one of them is wrecked. Well, you've just destroyed the graph again. So, you know, the UTXO model, when it's not being, how would you say, maintained correctly by the correct software implementations and the right people and whatever, can be an absolute nightmare, right? But when it works, because you've got this segregated state where at least at the time of spending, it's not really like, it's not really dependent on anything other than the previous transaction, right? So you can split that up very, very, you know, you can scale that in parallel very well.
It's amazing. The you know, the Bitcoin white paper, what it describes, or Bitcoin, as you and I said, just not any of these particular chains, but just Bitcoin, sort of the idea. It is so many incredible innovations in terms of aligning incentives in order to make this kind of, you know, global digital cash possible. But I think there's an area that I think it took a long time, several years, for people to sort of figure this out. Maybe Mike Hearn figured it out earlier than most, but where the incentives are still not solved. And that is, like, wouldn't you want a system where you don't have to rely on really good, smart people who make really good decisions and don't do stupid things, right? As like, because what you're describing to me, you're like, look, BSV could work if people would just be better. And it's like, well, you don't want the technology to require people to be better people or to be better business people or whatever.
No, we do want that.
The incentives to just to let idiots who are self-interested come on there and do the thing that's good for the network, you know. But you can't escape that to a degree when it comes to the protocol or the node software.
What it is, it's incentives. You know, it's incentives chasing incentives. So you've got the primary developers who are working on the software won't accept external input at all. It's completely closed source development. They just release it publicly and call it open source, right? They're being paid a salary whether they do a good job or not, right? To then hand this over to miners who primarily chase a block reward, and outside of that chase the giant, you know, the giant stacks of data, and don't really care about what problems they create for anyone else on the network. And so really, like, if you just took away all of these incentives and things were left up to just like a market without this like essentially like socialist incentive system, or another way of putting it, if the block subsidy died off like 5 years ago or something, and it was forced to be a fee market, right? People would have to be better. People would have to do more.
I think that's the biggest thing. I really do. I think the block subsidy reduction schedule was not nearly aggressive enough. Yeah,
it's way too long.
I think that's the fatal flaw. Max. That's the fatal flaw. So this has been really fun getting into the weeds on some of this stuff. It sounds like, if I could sum up where you're at, you're like, look, I want to be able to do all this incredible stuff, including micropayments, which is the thing that I'm focused on with this series. I'll do it with whatever technology works. There's things I like enough about Bitcoin to think that it is worth trying to figure out how to make that the thing that does it at massive scale. Yes, I'm open to Solana and some of these others. They may even be better in certain cases, but it is worth trying to overcome. There are very real problems when you come to you know, big block Bitcoin, but it is absolutely worth trying to solve those, and those are probably solvable. Would that be a fair characterization of kind of your take?
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty close to it. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't really care. I would just want to make money, right? And I want other people to be able to make money. I want people to be able to engage in free trade with as little middlemen in the way as possible, as few as possible, rather. And I want to basically have a scalable digital economy that, you know, anyone can participate in and create value in. And I think Bitcoin, the Bitcoin protocol, has the ability to do that. Whether or not that happens on BSV remains to be seen. But for right now, at least, it's like a place where I can deal with the most incompetent people and the most wicked problems and the worst possible things that I have to deal with, while solving these problems to make it like to battle test my own software implementations. And if that ends up living somewhere else 10 years from now or whatever, because it's all a big failure, great, at least I've solved the problem. And if it ends up living on this network and this network ends up improving and becoming the one that wins it all, also great. I'm not emotionally attached, but I do find the idea of Bitcoin, the original, enchanting. I'm sure everybody does to some extent. There's something kind of, special about it. It was not the first cryptocurrency. It was not the first blockchain, but it was the one that took off, So I don't think that it's just simply plumbing. I think there's more to the idea of Bitcoin than just that.
If there's somebody listening to this who is toying around with an idea, maybe they want to spin up an app that utilizes micropayments and get something out there, get their hands dirty, what advice do you have for them?
I would say start with a market of 10 to 20 people and create a cool app and see if you can, see if they like it, gather feedback, and just always iterate and follow what your customers and your community, maybe not everything they say, but at least listen to them and take that on board and allow that to make you better. And make sure that you're solving for a real problem. And so it's kind of the same as any business. However, I would say that in Bitcoin, you have the ability to monetize from day one. And people sending you a couple of pennies is a much more valuable signal than someone saying, "Oh, I'd pay for that." Yep. Right? It's like, well, why don't you pay for it now? So I think every company I've ever started, every app I've started on this chain, accepted payment from day one, and it ended up accepting more and more payments because it got popular and was useful to somebody. So think outside the box. Micropayments don't have to go everywhere. They don't have to be everything. Bitcoin doesn't have to solve every problem, right? It just has to solve the double spend problem, and it's already cheap, affordable, fast, usable for your means. So that would be my quick advice.
I love it. Dean, this has been awesome. Always a pleasure. Until next time, man.
Yeah. All right. See you, man. Thank you.